Hey there, welcome back. It's been a while, hasn't it? Today I'd like to take some time to discuss CAS, its place in the game, and the means by which it can be done effectively. It's going to be a bit of a longer video, so if you're looking for something specific, the sections will be timestamped in the comment section below. Please take note that I am by no means an authority on CAS, and while it is definitely a big chunk of my playstyle, as those of you who frequent the stream will know, as with all guides and tutorial type videos, I strongly recommend you take what I and others have to say with a hefty pinch of salt, and figure out what works best for you. Further to this, what I personally find to be ineffective may be very effective for others if it fits their playstyle more, or if they have more experience with a given technique. There is no one perfect way to play the game, and I, nor most people, are any kind of authority on it. Ultimately, what gets you results is what matters, and practice makes perfect. Close air support, otherwise known as CAS, is a means to broadly describe attacking ground units with aircraft in War Thunder. It focuses on the direct support of ground forces rather than the presence of aircraft in the battle space as a whole, who may be conducting more general operations such as air superiority, also referred to as CAP, combat air patrol, that do not directly influence the ground combat but have broader supporting elements. As such, in this video I won't be touching too heavily on air-to-air combat in ground battles. CAS is almost as old as military aviation itself, broadly dating back to the First World War. Aircraft were initially used as reconnaissance, but it didn't take particularly long for the warring nations to realise that delivering firepower from these airborne assets was a powerful new tool at their disposal. In the First World War, CAS mostly consisted of strafing trenches, but dropping bombs, at this time essentially just hand grenades, predates the First World War entirely, first being used by the Italians during the Italo-Turkish War in 1911. Through the interwar period, close air support matured into what we would see during the Second World War, albeit with some teething problems arising from the differing goals and ideals of Air Force and Army thought circles across multiple militaries, jostling for their version of air power's role in the battlefield to become dominant. Often in these days, aircraft were given pre-allocated targets to hit as part of a larger planned assault, or a general area and targets to look out for, without too much communication between ground and air units, if any. Aircraft provided point target support far in excess of what was possible with artillery, and while it by no means took over the role of artillery, the advent of efficient radio communications has, over time, led to far more integration between ground and air being possible. In the later stages of the war, what we now see as CAS in today's battlefield was beginning to take form. There's a lot to discuss about the history of CAS, so without going into too much detail, over time, air and ground synergy has grown, with processes and technology growing to make the task far easier, such as means to standardise the instructions given to the pilot, resulting in things such as the NATO 9-line call for fires, processes that allow a pilot and forward air controller to coordinate the support one-to-one in real time, as opposed to planning hours in advance, giving the ground commander much more tactical freedom and flexibility in regards to how they wish to specifically apply the close air support available, and vastly lowering the time from call to effect.
Good hit, Brent, good hit.
Within War Thunder, CAS is typically a one-person endeavour, with a player potentially picking up unmarked or described targets from friendly units, but more often than not striking alone, finding and attacking their own targets entirely independently from ground units. In some ways, this separates it rather significantly from real-world CAS, but for all intents and purposes it's the same in terms of the results that it provides: direct support against enemy combatants. CAS can broadly be divided into a four-stage process that changes a little based on ordnance: bombs, rockets and guns. I say guns and not cannons, as while machine guns are unlikely to penetrate an enemy vehicle, they may still mark the vehicle on the map, allowing the pilot to scout for his or her team, and cannons fall within the purview of guns regardless. While I strongly urge that you build a sense of intuition when it comes to your aircraft and application of its firepower, I've outlined 4 phases that may help some players ensure their CAS develops into something more orderly and effective, and hopefully avoid any kind of lawn darting into the first target identified, guns blazing. My 4 phases are: spotting your target, aligning yourself to it, engaging the target, and disengaging from it. Spotting entails scanning the combat area for targets, be that via marks, tracers, track lines, or simply spotting the vehicle itself. Note that when tanks fire, they create a puff of smoke that clearly identifies their location. Pay particular attention to areas that may compromise cap zones, flanking routes that your team has left exposed, or dominant terrain areas that your enemy may be using to lock down portions of the map, as you should be aiming to prioritise threats to your team and enable their free movement onto objectives and dominant terrain. With this, of course, comes the need to also spot enemies that may shortly be attacking your friendly units. As a cast plane, most of the time you will be hamstrung if you lose your ground allies and the enemy seizes the cap zone initiative. Pay particular attention to enemy SPAA, as they are usually softer targets that are more easily taken out by your payload, but equally have much more potential to damage you than a tank's roof machine gun. You're no good to anyone if you're a burning heap of metal in the middle of the map because of a whirlwind. Also note, you may spot one target while engaging the other, and you can react to that accordingly on your next engagement. Aligning yourself to the target varies somewhat based on payload. If carrying bombs, you should be aiming to have a stable attitude, in this instance meaning that your wings are steady and level, for some time prior to dropping your bombs, so that they drop down straight and predictably. However, as you become more skilled and comfortable, dropping the bombs in a pitched manoeuvre to fling them slightly sideways becomes more viable. With rockets and guns, mostly you should be in a steeper dive, allowing yourself the angle closest to 90 degrees to the top of the vehicle to ensure success. This is not strictly necessary with every rocket type. Be aware that the closer to a full 90-degree dive you are with your ordnance, the less you need to account for drop caused by gravity, which may allow you to engage over great distances. This also comes with the pitfall of being harder to pull out of, though. Engaging the target, as the name suggests, is putting your weapons on target and achieving a hit or kill on the enemy. Bombs should be dropped at the latest possible moment to allow your enemy the smallest window of manoeuvre and reaction time, but you must always remember to give yourself enough space to pull up. Rockets can be launched from varying distances, but the closer you are, the less chance you have to miss. Guns require little setup, but for your cannons to penetrate, you often have to have specific angles both vertically and in terms of the opposing tank's position. You should consider these factors during your alignment, and follow it through during your engagement. You must also balance giving yourself enough time on target with leaving yourself enough time to pull up. Always remember that you don't have to fully commit to each dive. If the circumstances change, or you aren't confident in your accuracy on a given engagement dive, you can always break off and come back. Disengaging from the target is more than simply flying away. You need to put yourself into a position to either re-engage, engage another target, or respond to incoming enemy aircraft in a timely manner, to reset yourself, so to speak. You will have built up a fair amount of speed during your attack, and using that energy to either regain altitude or reposition yourself somewhere else on the battlefield is a great use of it. It's a good idea to check the enemy plane spawn every now and then, and to be mindful of incoming enemy fighters, especially as the match goes on and your presence is more known. People will respawn in fighters after you've killed them in order to take revenge. On this note, people will also respawn in SPAA whether you have killed them or not, and it's no good to finish a cast run only to find yourself shredded by one while scanning for your next target. Generally speaking, keeping yourself on the fringes of their punching distance for as long as possible, and returning to that state as quickly as possible after a run is a solid tactic. It's also worth noting that whenever SPAA is distracted or firing at another aircraft, they are vulnerable targets that you should absolutely prioritise, so engage them whenever possible. Kill potential is a significant consideration when deciding which aircraft and payload to use in a given situation. If you know the sky is filled with enemy fighters, perhaps a fighter bomber is more appropriate, while if you know the sky is clear and most of your enemy is on the ground, perhaps a heavier attacker is more suitable. Different bombs and rockets will be more or less effective based on tier and which targets you're likely to encounter, and making the wrong decision with either your payload choice or where you apply it can significantly limit your effectiveness, in much the same way missing a vital shot can when tanking. Firing a high explosive rocket at the front of an IS-3 isn't likely to have much effect, but splashing it into the cabin of an SPAA will yield great results. I would contest, as a general rule, that bombs are more simple and reliable to achieve success with than rockets, and learning effective bombing is a core skill that will help you with rocket and cannon casts, so really should be your first choice. Add to this that bombs and fighter bombers are present in every tech tree, while rocket and cannon cast capable aircraft are more varied and distinct. Learning bombing first will set you up in a great way to switch between nations. All bombs can be effective, but you must take note of the effective killing radius of your choice. A 50-kilogram bomb placed correctly can kill even a mouse or MBT, but on the balance of averages, it's not a particularly good idea to bank on that. 500-pound bombs will naturally need to be more accurately placed than 1,000-pounders, and if you're not confident, bigger is usually better. But in some instances you may find that higher weight means less bombs carried, which can definitely factor into a decision to use smaller bombs. The kill radius of a given bomb is noted in the stat card, and this is often a better way to judge precisely how damaging a bomb is compared to its contemporaries. Take into consideration that the faster you fly, the less time your bombs have to deviate to either side, but the drop window becomes smaller. This is to say, you will pass over the correct moment to drop your bombs much faster when flying faster. When flying out with bombs for CAS, fighting other aircraft shouldn't be your main concern, so the negative aerodynamic effects of carrying them shouldn't really be a concern either. But it's sometimes a good idea to keep your payload in mind and drop them as soon as you find yourself butting heads with another plane. You can always return to base for more, but you can't always respawn. With rockets, HE, AP and heat rockets require different points of aim. To determine which warhead a particular rocket has, you can look at the penetration chart in exactly the same way you would with tank shells. If it has low, uniform penetration across all ranges and angles, it's an HE rocket. If it has uniform penetration across all ranges but differing at angles, it is a heat rocket. And if it has decreasing penetration at both range and angles, it is an AP rocket. RP3s and RS-132s are somewhat an outlier, as they are functionally HE rockets with a semi-armor piercing warhead, which gives them a significant boost to penetration at closer ranges and smaller angles. When using smaller HE rockets, such as the HVAR and RS-82, you should be primarily targeting engine decks, tracks, and thin-skinned vehicles, as they really won't do much at all to armour. They will happily splash damage into engine compartments through the roof of a tank's hull and cause fires, but are unlikely to scratch any significant armour and are not particularly reliable. Larger HE rockets, such as Tiny Tims and the S-21 found on later MiGs, are capable of one-hits with their splash. With heat and AP rockets, depending on your alignment and the internal components of the target, aiming for the turret crew or ammunition can result in a one-hit kill. It's worth noting here that while the HVARs we have in-game on a significant number of American aircraft are the Mark 6 HE variant, a suggestion for other variants of the HVAR has been passed to devs, namely the Mark 25 heat warhead, which would put them relatively close behind Mighty Mouse heat rockets in terms of effectiveness, so cross your fingers for that one. Using your machine guns for the purposes of spotting generally requires little setup other than just getting your shots on target. Cannons, however, typically have a rather small window of penetration based on your enemy's armour and the performance of your cannons, which may require much more careful alignment in order to be effective. It's worth noting that at low tiers, 50 cal MGs may be all you need to crack an opponent's armour apart. It is vital that you check out at what ranges and angles your belts will be effective against enemies that you will likely encounter, and to be mindful of this when selecting and aligning yourself on a given target, as this will highly inform your gameplay and target selection. If you're looking to damage or kill an enemy, it's good to know whether it's viable, if even possible, before spending your time and ammunition on it. Be aware that on the belt info box, it will always show the penetration values of the highest penetrating round in the belt. Sometimes this can be misleading, as a belt with mostly HE rounds could have one AP shell in it, and it may trick you into thinking more than 1 in 4 shots will penetrate. Again, as with bombs, give yourself enough time to pull up, and be wary of compression. Also be aware that sometimes detracking and setting an enemy on fire is more than enough damage to influence the game in your favour, and you do not necessarily need to finish every kill to have an effect. If 2 enemies on a given flank are immobile and burning, that opens up many possibilities for your tank allies to reposition and capitalise on the enemy's immobility. Essentially, immobilising your enemies changes the balance of time. You take it from the enemy, and you give it to your team. With many things in War Thunder, the end state is having developed a feel for something. A feel for when you have more energy than your opponent in an acrobatic dogfight. A feel and then an informed guess on the range of a far-off enemy vehicle, and CAS is very much the same thing. It seems peculiar to say, but eventually you just know when to fire your bomb or rocket, so to speak. The trouble comes with getting to that point. It's a brilliant idea to load up a custom match filled with bots of the tier that you'll be fighting in order to get some practice in. This is something that I highly recommend, and it's what I've been using during this video to display the methods involved. Set up a pass-rated custom battle on a map of your choice. I suggest Kursk, as the air spawns are close and the ground is broadly flat as far as aircraft are concerned. Then add a bunch of bots at the same tier as the vehicle you're training with and go to town. Spawn in, use your payload, assess your damage, J out and repeat. It's quite difficult to convey exactly when to drop a bomb, so instead I'd like to mention some general steps to visualize where your bombs will likely fall and some tips for improving your bomb dropping over time. Ultimately, bombing becomes somewhat instinctual with practice. You get a feel for where the bombs will land, so to speak. Setting your bomb delay higher than normal can also give you more of a chance to press the tracking camera bomb key and see where your bombs have landed before they explode, which is a technique I definitely suggest when using custom battles to learn to bomb. It's good to remember that your bombs will begin travelling more or less along the line of your crosshair and drop from that line, as you would expect, via gravity. A tip that I still use and often hear has good results from other people is to imagine that there are 2 extra tank lengths forward of where the target is as you look at it. Whether that's on top of it, to the side, to the rear, so on and so forth. Imagine there are 3 next to each other, as you see here. Aim for the 3rd one, and you may find you experience an increase in results. Always try to keep your wings level in a bomb drop, because while it is possible to drop while banking, the line that your bombs will follow will be one that continues off from the bottom of your plane in that direction, especially when you're applying elevator input in a turn, causing the bombs to deviate significantly to either side. Personally, I use a bomb delay of 0.5 seconds, but it's ultimately personal preference which timer you use. I find that 0.5 seconds gives me just enough time to be clear of the blast radius even if I drop one very close to the target, while also having that little sick pleasure of knowing that my opponent has that split second of, oh bugger, but no time to avoid the bomb. Make note in the stat card of how close your bomb has to be to a tank to include it in the kill radius, and that'll give you an idea of how accurate you need to be. It's entirely possible to kill a mouse with a tiny bomb, you just have to be pinpoint accurate. As I said before, bigger is often better if you're looking for a wide margin for error. Rocket cast has changed somewhat over the years. I think we can all agree on that. These are some clips from the Orange Doom's cast montage Immortal from 1.69. The patch immediately before HVAR damage was adjusted to more or less what it is today, and other rockets were adjusted to be less simple to use. Update 1.71 on the 18th of September 2017 changed most rockets from a splash zone similar to bombs to a damage system more like tank shells, and is the reason that quite a large number of people nowadays swear by bombs only and contest that rockets are now useless. Orange disagrees with me, but this isn't quite the case. Rocket cast has definitely evolved, and it's nowhere near as easy as it used to be, but under no circumstances is it, so to speak, dead. It's the cast that is closest to my heart, I guess because I find it looks cool and it feels satisfying. Rockets are less reliable, shall we say, than bombs. The same point of aim will really produce exactly the same impact point, even with a maxed crew. There is always a degree of deviation on rockets, compounded by the varying positions of them on the wing. This can make consistent rocket damage very hard to attain. As we mentioned earlier, different rocket types have different ways in which they can be effective, so I shan't rehash that too much for now. With that said, I would recommend getting into a habit of picking one side of the rocket scale to use while mostly ignoring the other. Personally, I mostly just aim with the left. This is because typically it's better to make a conscious effort for one of your rockets to land than it is to aim centrally and rely on convergence, as again, rocket paths vary and this isn't particularly consistent. The scale is allegedly graded for drop over different distances, but it doesn't account for gravity nor angle of dive at all, so I tend to use it more of a guide of simply whereabouts in the surrounding space to aim off from it than as a ballistic aid or a ranging tool. Take out a plane and rockets that you want in a custom, add some bots, password lock the room with something, anything, and get to practicing. Observe how your rockets drop differently based on the angle of your dive, which distance you feel comfortable firing them from, and how the point of aim changes as you fire rockets from different positions on the wing. Generally speaking, planes with more centerline rockets are more easily used than those where the rockets are far out on the wing, at least when it comes to hitting tanks. So factor this into your aircraft and payload considerations. For example, the Focke-Wulf 190 F8 Panzerblitz rockets are much closer to the center of the fuselage than those on the Hornet, which is more difficult to use. If you're using high-capacity rockets such as the Snebs or Hydras with large banks of rockets available, you may find it useful to bind a key for rocket salvo. This will continuously fire rockets at high speed as long as the button is held down, allowing you to fire a number of rockets at one target in one pass. Cannon CAS relies largely on the same approaches developed with bombs and rockets, but typically with a steeper dive angle. For the most reliable penetrations, you often want to be either attacking from the sides, rear or roof of your target, with roof hits typically being the fastest way to disable your enemy. Unlike bombs and rockets though, cannon strikes are vastly more reliant on knowing where your enemy's weak spots are, what vehicles you can and cannot penetrate, where you can penetrate on those vehicles, and at what ranges, which is only really established by using the armor viewer and a significant deal of experience. Of course, you can fire a lot of cannon rounds and hope for the best, but in order to have significant and consistent damage, you need to know where you're firing. Focus on what your cannon penetration values are at 500 meters, not at point blank, as you will want to actually survive making a pass on an enemy target. Always be wary of your ammunition counter, and be mindful of how the drop of your shells would be affected by a dive. It's also wise to turn vertical targeting off if you do have it on, as when it is enabled, the guns will be pointed above the horizontal and will force you to enter an even steeper dive once you're inside your convergence distance. While not a hard and fast rule, even with 20mm guns with AP belts can be effective against certain parts of enemy armor, and if you're planning on using an aircraft for CAS, it's in your best interest to look out for particular targets that are weak to your guns. As you reach top tier, things change a little. Radar-guided anti-aircraft starts to be a thing, so your standoff distance and where you are able to operate without having to worry about AA becomes much more restrictive. With the Tunguska as it currently is, top-tier CAS for anyone except Russia is nowhere near as viable as it historically has been, as there is a very good chance for a Tunguska to kill you the moment after spawning if they're paying attention, with very little that you can do to evade. The automatic does come in a close second here though. On your side, weapons such as the AGM-12 Bullpup and AS-20 Nord begin to appear, which are missiles that you can guide via the correct settings. I'm often asked on stream about my settings for guiding missiles, so here they are. If I'm fighting an SPAA that is looking directly at me, I will often launch a missile, engage free look by pressing C, and maneuver my aircraft with my keyboard while guiding my missile in with the other hand. This allows you to maintain distance from the SPAA while also striking it and neutralizing the threat with any luck. Bombs and rockets remain much the same, with Snebs, S5Ks, Hydras and even RP3s still being viable for anti-tank strikes even at this high BR. Also, while you're not likely to get close to them, quite a few of the SPAA's turrets can be defeated with your cannons. Good luck though. Helicopters employ a camera that is similar to the sniper view for tanks to guide their missiles in, which are all mouse aimed, even in instances where the same missile is aimed with the keyboard, namely MCLOS, on ground vehicles. Climbing over your helipad has become significantly less viable with the new radar system, with vehicles such as the Sergeant York, 2S6 Tunguska, and Automatic able to strike you down from almost anywhere. Try maneuvering low to the ground using trees to mask yourself, as radar will have a hard time getting a lock on you, never mind maintaining it. There is much less strategy for helicopters, and in the right hand and the right circumstances they can change a game, but they are also incredibly vulnerable to fixed-wing aircraft. At the time of publishing, in patch 1.87, at 10.0, helicopters are of significantly limited viability due to the prevalence of the Tunguska. You will often be spawn killed with no recourse, and your spawn points are probably better spent elsewhere. It's also worth noting that while they have changed the radar system, it still doesn't quite work in terms of terrain masking. Quite often behind trees or behind terrain where you should be hidden, you will still be spotted and tracked by the radar. You will still be vulnerable, even when you shouldn't be. With the current system, there isn't really too much to talk about when it comes to top tier close air support. It's really taken a bash at 1.87. Hopefully that'll change in the future though. That just about concludes this video. I hope I've given you some kind of insight into the process of CAS and maybe helped you develop your tactics or told you something you didn't know. As I said at the start, I'm by no means an amazing player, but I feel I do have some degree of experience when it comes to CAS. If you have any comments or specific questions, please leave them down below. See you soon! Through the interwar period, close air support matured into what we would see during the Second World War, albeit with some teething problems. Alright, teething. What are we? Fucking dicks.